To This Week in Washington for Friday, December the 9th, 2011. Last week I spent some time speaking with you about legislative issues here in Washington. Since that time, there has been some progress on a transit reauthorization bill as part of a transportation bill that will be released next week, or at least is rumored to be released next week, by the Senate Banking Committee. During the last several days, we've been heavily involved in discussing the important aspects of that bill that relate to the reauthorization plans of our association. In addition to that, Scott Bogren has been working with our allies on the operating side of the transit reauthorization to make sure that we provide greater flexibility on operating costs for all transit systems. I hope that Congress will understand that the best way that we can help our members meet the significant economic challenges they face is providing them with greater flexibility on the utilization of their funds as they deem necessary. Hopefully, these principles will emerge in that draft reauthorization bill. Until we see it, we're going to continue to urge those priorities be included. I'm not very optimistic, as I said last week, that a transportation bill will, in fact, emerge even during the congressional session next year. In talking about that, I would like to relate that we have had a very difficult time trying to conclude an appropriations process for instance, the labor HHS bill. That bill needs to have another continuing resolution that would take it through the full federal fiscal year. It's several months behind now, and the House and the Senate have been unable to agree on this important legislation, even though many of our community transportation members have a stake in some portion of that bill. The differences between the Senate and the House are extremely far apart on the financing piece of that legislation, and that the House has adopted significant reductions in human services programs despite this economic situation. The Senate has been unwilling to go along with those changes. Hence, this piece of legislation has been stymied like many others. Also this week, I'm sure you've seen in the news, Congress has been working with trying to continue and to maintain the employer and employee tax cut called the payroll tax cut that expires in December of this year. Yesterday, there was another failure to extend the tax because the Republicans in the Senate proposed paying for this extension by an across-the-board reduction in federal employment and a long-term freeze on wages for current federal employees. Congress, according to the President, will be here during the Christmas break as long as it takes to enact this legislation. And if you saw any of the President's speech in Osawatomie, Kansas this week, you'll know that he has made this an ironclad priority. And those of us who have seen ironclad priorities change in the past feel that this one has become very solid as far as the administration is concerned, especially since the public likes the connection between keeping this tax reduction in place by financing it, at least from the Democratic perspective, by raising taxes on millionaires. So we're going to have to stay tuned to this issue as we have. It's good to hear that there is some possible progress, but we would like to see what this proposed legislation will look like in its final form and what the progress would be in the House should the legislation emerge. In other issues that I'd like to mention today, I hope that all of you have received your recent copy of Digital CT magazine. Every time a digital CT issue comes out, I like to think, my goodness, this is really much, much better than the previous one. I especially like this issue, and I think we did a really good job on covering the day in the life of community transportation. And I want to thank Scott and Rich and all of the 30 people across the United States who volunteered to be our reporters, to report on things that happen in our business across the nation, from sunrise to sunset, from the very early morning hours of one day to the very last minute of the next. I think the article reminds us and supports one of my favorite visions of our membership, which is that our association and the work of community transportation is very much like a quilt and not a seamless fabric. Every piece of our work seems to be different, but the border on our quilt reflects the kind of good leadership, good management, and commitment to service that has always been part of community transportation. And I think that Scott caught that very well in his editor's note when he referred to it as being the finest kind of public transportation service and the finest kind of public service in America. I think that comes across very well in this article. The other part of the magazine, I'm sure, that I thought was extremely important was the article on dialysis. I do believe that the dialysis transportation issue, as I said at our last board meeting, portrays our industry in the finest service that it delivers to people who desperately need a way back and forth to life-sustaining health care. The challenges in the article talk about our inability to continue to provide the service with the greater demands that are emerging here, which has also been an extremely important part of why community transportation is so important in our country. I used this article this week and part of testimony I gave about why we needed to do more in this area to the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and be assured that you'll be hearing more about that. Scott reported to me that we had an interesting call once the article came out from representatives of the American Cancer Society. And they called about a follow-up meeting with us about the article because they said that when you substituted the word chemotherapy for dialysis in this article, you had their story. And they want to work with us to try to make sure we educate Congress that dialysis and chemotherapy all benefit from community and public transit, and all are mired in the difficulty created by not enough transportation resources when an entire service switches to an outpatient mode of service delivery. This is good news for us, and we hope that this generates more support for our position that we need to have additional resources for you and for our members to further the goals of maintaining this important health care. Despite the situation here in Washington, there is still an opportunity for us to communicate our message. We did it a lot this week on the last-minute run-up to the Senate Banking Committee. We did it on dialysis in the Senate this week, and we'll be making more progress in these areas shortly. We continue to ask all of you to mention some of these similar arrangements and similar situations in your communities, and I would hope that you would find a number of interesting and good uses for the dialysis piece. So, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to let me know. You'll be hearing from me again soon. I'll be back to you as soon as we know what happened on the Senate bill, and keep looking in your email for our legislative updates on Fast Mail. Have a good weekend. Thanks for your attention to this update, and have a great time preparing for the holidays. Bye for now.